And I said, I haven't said goodbye yet. So I didn't care that I was actually going to die. What I cared about was I didn't have the opportunity to say goodbye to my loved ones. So in an instant, an aspect of my awareness was able to be interstate, in the garden to say goodbye to my father, in the kitchen to say goodbye to my mother, in the car to say goodbye to my brother, at my sister's house to say goodbye to her, and then on the Gold Coast to say goodbye to my children. And then I was back in the room. So I was kind of here, there, and everywhere in the speed of thought. It was crazy. Actually, it was the speed of love, I was told.
Hello, thank you for tuning in. My name is Nella, and welcome to my podcast, ETHEREALITY. Today's guest is Josie Thomson. She is a lovely free spirit who had her first near-death experience during surgery and then a cancer diagnosis following. Josie has gone on quite the journey, having multiple near-death experiences and overcoming cancer, but I think what's most amazing about her is who she has become through all of this. Thank you, Josie, for being here with me today.
It's a pleasure.
So you had multiple near-death experiences. When did the first one happen?
The first two happened in close succession. I was only 24 years old. I'd never even heard of an NDE. Didn't know that I was about to be diagnosed with cancer either. So after the first surgery, I had lost a lot of blood. And as a consequence of that, I was in intensive care and unconscious for about a period of 2 weeks. After about the third day, I think it was, in ICU, is when I had the first near-death experience. I was surrounded by my family. Even though my physical body was unconscious, I could tell you where every single person was sitting and who was saying what. It was really quite phenomenal to realize that even though I wasn't consciously awake physically, I was completely dislodged, but I had this awakeness going on in this lifeless physical body. I could hear the beeping on the equipment, so I had completely flatlined. I died, and I all of a sudden had awareness of an aspect of my awareness floating on the ceiling, looking down at my physical body. So I had full awareness that I was here and I was there. And it was just this really serene, peaceful, floating sensation, and everything just felt white. There was just this sense of the color white everywhere. And I was watching the nurses running into the room, trying to get my body to revive. And all of a sudden I heard this really loud male voice saying, "It's not your time yet." And it was really stern and assertive, and you don't mess with that voice. And I didn't know who it was at the time, and all of a sudden my body responded and I was back in my body. And then the same thing happened the next day where the vitals switched off. I was floating up on the ceiling looking down at my physical body. And again, this voice said, "It's not your time yet." So that was the first NDE. I didn't have any, trips out of that room, but I did have that out-of-body experience where I had full awareness that an aspect of me was above here looking down at my physical form. And what really surprised me, Nella, that there was no panic, there was no real emotion. There was just this genuine serenity in that whole experience. It was just extraordinary, actually. And then it was like, well, did that really happen? How do you talk about it? And this was before the internet, right? So I started buying all these books about cancer and how to treat cancer, and I ended up with more questions than answers. And then I actually started reading about other people's experiences of NDEs, and I'm like, I had that. And then all of a sudden I didn't feel so alone.
At what point were you diagnosed with cancer?
I was diagnosed with cancer while I was in the hospital. So they did the surgery, still not knowing that it was going to be cancer, because I was 24, super fit, never drank, never smoked. the doctor decided not to do a biopsy because he's like, it won't be anything. It's just a cyst. We'll just remove it and you'll be fine. There was no other, indicators to suggest that it could be anything nasty. So the doctor was just as equally surprised as I was when we realized it was stage 3 malignant cancer, which required a second surgery. And that's what had me go into ICU, because I had 2 surgeries literally back to back. Day 1, first surgery, then they got the results and he said, right, we need to do a quick second surgery because it's going to be spreading now. So we did the second surgery literally the next day, and that's why I lost all that blood and was unconscious. And yeah.
So when you did return to your body after the near-death experiences, you said that you had some questions, right? Some doubting maybe of what you had experienced?
I don't think it was doubt. Oh, was it doubt? It was more about, was that real? Like, did I just make that up? But I was able to later say to my family members who were sitting there, did you say this and did you do this? And they're sitting there going, how do you know you were unconscious? But I could recall every conversation and I could recall exactly where people were sitting, and I was totally unconscious. So that wasn't made up. And then when I had this recall of the experience, the NDE experience, it was like, it definitely happened. I just know it happened. But it's, how do you prove it? But when I was reading other people's stories, I'm like, that's what happened to me. And so I bought, I think it was like 17 books on cancer. Because I am like an analyst in my mind, I like to understand the nature of life and what's going on. And so I read every one of those books back to back. And I came across the works of Louise Hayes and Ian Gawler. And that's when I started reading about other people's experiences. And I was like, okay. So, I didn't go out publicly talking about it with my friends and family because they would probably just say it was the morphine. But I knew it wasn't. And then in 2009, Christmas Eve, I was diagnosed with a lesion just on my brain here. Before the surgery, I went and spoke to a spiritual healer in Sydney, Australia. So she was interstate. And someone had recommended her to me. And I was open-minded. After something like a cancer diagnosis comes your way, it kind of bursts open your awareness and consciousness to start to think about things more deeply, to start to not just ask bigger questions, but actually seek your own answers. And so I started becoming more open to different approaches to life, to healing, to everything. And so when this friend suggested I go and see this spiritual healer, once upon a time I would have gone, no way, I'd just stick to my doctors, thank you very much. But I thought, something in me said, why not? Just go check it out. You've got nothing to lose. So I flew to Sydney and I had this session with her, and she does this thing called trance channeling, and I'd never heard about that before. And that's where this person will channel into a physical body and, express whoever that entity is through her physical form. She was telling me about it, and I was like very skeptical, going, yeah, whatever, And all of a sudden, the first person she channeled was the doctor who had invented Reiki. And I had studied level 1 and 2 of Reiki. It was a male Asian voice, and it was literally coming out of her body. And I'm sitting there like curious because I'd never seen this before. And this voice went on to tell me, okay, in 2 days' time, you're going to be given all these options in the hospital, but these are the only options you are to take. And I'm thinking, how does this person even know? Because I never said anything to her. And then she did this thing with her neck, and she said, there's someone else coming through. And then all of a sudden, her body literally grew bigger in her seat. And I'm watching this, and now my nails were deeply embedded in my chair because I'm like, I don't know what's going on here. And it was this big, booming male voice. And the second he started talking, I recognized it immediately. And it was the voice that spoke to me in 1991.
Wow.
And this voice said, look, in 2 days' time, you'll be given a choice, but you must decide. And I said, what do you mean? And this voice said, well, in 2 days' time, you will decide whether you will return home because you belong to my choir, or whether you will return to this life and your work will commence in earnest. And then he went on to say some other things. And then I got the courage to say, who are you? And then all of a sudden the voice actually spoke and said, I am Archangel Gabriel. And every hair on my body stood up to attention, and I just felt this wave of absolute unconditional love envelop me all around. And even now when I share it, I can still feel it. And I mean, Archangel Gabriel's been with me ever since. You know, it's just in my conscious awareness now. And it's a guide that I partner with every single day. And it's really comforting to know that the veils of illusion are just a construct that exists because we're not awake to it yet. But once you wake up to it, no one can take that connection away because you just know it. You feel it, you connect with it, and it's there. It's undeniable.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just because you can't see it doesn't mean it's not real. Mm-hmm. You can't see the breath, it's real. Yeah? You can't see the wind, it's real.
So before your near-death experiences, did you have any sort of background of spirituality or religion?
Spirituality, no. Religion, yes. I was raised a Catholic and I was very religious. I'd go to church every Sunday and I believed in God, and I still believe in God, but I don't believe in the Catholic Church anymore. That was really the breaking open of my quest as a seeker on this path. So I started asking bigger questions like, would the God that I know allow something like this to happen to me? You know, I'm a good person. Like, have I sinned to deserve cancer? Like, the way I was thinking was very limited, but it was based on the upbringing and the doctrines that I was raised with. And all of a sudden I had big questions. But more importantly, I decided to claim my own power by seeking the answers for myself. They were no longer answers that had been given to me by people in authority that I blindly accepted, believed, and trusted. All of a sudden, I became a much more conscious seeker on my own path. And so I became much more spiritual. I went back to the church. I gave them the opportunity for redemption, if you like, and to help me understand things in a broader way. But the answers I was given were just not valid anymore because the God of my knowing wouldn't put conditions on me to be accepted back into his home. And so this is when I now became more spiritual than religious.
Right. Yes. I can relate. So when you determined that your experience absolutely was true and valid, did you at that point try sharing it with people?
No. It wasn't something, Nella, that I felt people wanted to know or that they might even understand. I didn't feel like there was a need to share that. It was a very personal thing. I was dealing more with the impact and influence of people's fear around me because I had been diagnosed with cancer, and the doctor actually in writing said I would have 6 months to live.
Oh, wow.
That put alarm bells out to my network of friends and family. And I was getting phone calls from people saying, oh, Josie, I heard about what happened. How long have you got? The influence and the impact of those responses was quite off-putting and unsettling. And I knew there was something in me that said, you know what, I'm actually not scared. I've got a different fight going on inside of me. And so what I was able to observe, and now, you know, having studied neuroscience, I can understand what I did. But at the time I didn't understand. There was absolutely initially a genuine fear of, oh my goodness, am I going to die? then that's a fight against something. You know, I'm fighting against cancer or fighting against dying. But then there was this other fight which felt far more empowering, and that was the will to live. You know, and there was this switch that went off in my mind, in my brain, in my being that said, I want to live. And so I aligned all of my thoughts, my focus, my decisions in that direction. So there was actually no room or no scope for fear at all. It just didn't enter into my awareness because I knew what I wanted and that's what I was going for. So I knew how I needed to think. I knew the right decisions to make to allow myself that possibility. And I took charge of that. And what that also meant was having healthy boundaries around being in the presence of energies that brought my field or my vibration down. So I didn't understand it at the time logically. It was just an intuition that knew. Something in me knew that doesn't feel right. I'm going to stay away from that. Or the influence of these people is really deleterious. I need to limit my presence in that field. So there was something that started awakening within me, a knowing that I was remembering without actually knowing what it was. And that worked.
Absolutely, that worked.
That absolutely worked. I'm still here.
Yeah. I mean, mind over matter, right? The power of the will to live. Yeah, no, I love that.
And I think it's important to make the distinction that it's not wishful thinking. Right. It's not about just being positive, because if you don't believe it, it's not going to work. And so having studied neuroscience, what I understand now is that the brain is wired for survival. So the brain is on the lookout for anything that might threaten your sense of safety, right? And that's not a bad thing. It's just that because sometimes it can be heightened and hypersensitive, you may get into a pattern of being on the lookout for threats that you can't see the good things that are equally present at the same time. And so you'll be thinking about, I don't want to be rejected. I don't want to not fit in. I don't want to be not approved of, whatever it is. And while you're focusing on what you don't want, you're actually not focusing on what you do want. So you can never have what you want while your focus is on what you don't want. So for me, what I realized, if I focused on not dying, I wasn't focusing on living.
Right.
And so something in me just went, right, focus on this. And while I'm focusing on this, guess what? I'm not focusing on that bad stuff. And it wasn't that I was ignoring it. It wasn't in my field. I wasn't focusing on any of that because it wasn't existing in what I was creating for myself. And even though that sounds really simple, it's actually not that easy. And this is what Archangel Gabriel was saying to me, that you'll be given a choice, but you must decide. So as humans, we have this thing called free will, and spirit won't interfere with that. We have to make the decisions. The choices are there, but we're the ones that decide where we're going, right? And so I had the choice to either focus on the distortion or focus on what I wanted, and whichever way I chose was what I was going to get. So what I was absolutely awake to was realizing I had choice. We all have choice. But then once you decide, that becomes your path. And it becomes this non-negotiable line in the sand that says, you know what, try all you like. You're not going to interfere with me because I've already decided what I'm doing. And when you've got that sovereignty and that willpower, nothing gets in the way. There'll be things that happen around you that will test you, you know. But at the end of the day, you get to decide how you respond. So you're going to feel the trigger. You're going to feel a bit of a reaction. That's normal, right? But then you decide and go, oh, in your mind, you say to yourself, I'm feeling triggered by something that person said. I could either really get mad and react, or I could walk away. What feels better for me? Actually, I feel more peaceful if I just walk away. See ya.
Right.
It's actually like, that's it. It's actually just becoming awake and aware, and then taking full responsibility, not for pleasing anybody else or not for winning. It's about taking responsibility for your inner peace. What gives me greater peace?
Right. I mean, that's determining what you allow in your energy field. Somebody explained it to me once as having like a great wall around their city, and they're the city, and they get to choose what they allow to come through the gate into their city.
With my coaching clients, I have a model that I created called the bubble. So I don't want to put walls up because then that creates a sense of separation.
That's fair.
It is a kind of separation, but by using a bubble, it's like a balloon. You can see out, they can see in, but there's still this film that separates even you and me, right? We're online. You're there, I'm here. Inside my bubble, I fill it up with my favorite color. So my favorite color at the moment is a golden color. And I allow myself to breathe that golden color in, notice what it feels like in my cells, notice what it feels like in my body, on my skin, and it's beautiful, it tingles. And then inside my bubble, I've got my values, my core values, and they're my non-negotiables. They're things I will not compromise for anybody. Then on the other side of the bubble is the rest of the world. You've got your bubble. Everybody else I know has their bubble. Everybody else I don't know, they've all got their own bubbles. And as we're walking around, the bubbles hit up against each other because we all have energy fields that interact. Now, what will happen is if your bubble bumps up against my bubble and I get a good feeling about it, I'm going to allow you in my field. But if your bubble comes up against my bubble and I get a bit of something doesn't feel right here, that's information. So my energy field is giving me information. It's not logical, it's energy. Like Tesla said, everything is energy, vibration, and light, right? So if we remember that, the body gives you instant feedback. So the field communicates with the physical body, and then the body tries to get your attention to say, something doesn't feel right here. Then what happens is our logical brain goes, something doesn't feel right, but that's ridiculous. Everything looks fine. We try to logicalize a message that we're getting from energy, which is a different language. So it doesn't actually work. It's energy. If the energy feels good, it's because it is good. If the energy starts to contract, it means pay attention, something isn't right here. You just got to honor the fact that your energy field's picking up stuff that maybe you don't comprehend fully, but it's giving you feedback, it's information that you need to pay attention to.
I like that better than the city and the walls. You had the encounter with the medium. Wasn't there a third one that came through her?
Yeah, so once Archangel Gabriel finished speaking with me about things, then she came back into her body and then she said, oh, hang on a minute, there's someone else that wants to come in. And I'm like, oh gosh, and by this stage, like I'd been crying and I felt all this unconditional love and I realized this was real. And then all of a sudden her body sort of started to get smaller and this little child's voice came out of her. And this little child's voice was saying things like, oh, have you noticed that you love babies? And I'm like, yeah. She goes, no, you really, really, really love babies. I'm like, yes, I do. If I see a baby, I have this instant connection. It doesn't matter whose baby it is. We just lock eyes and that's it. We're done, She said, do you know why? And I said, no. And she said, because when you were up here, you were in charge of us. And we had lots of fun. And I just have this affinity with babies, And she was a little cherub angel. And then she went on to say, I've got something for you. And she went on to just trash this woman's office. She was just pulling things out of drawers. And I'm thinking, I'm going to get in trouble for this. She found this, when you go to the beach, sometimes you can find these stacked shells, like layers and layers of shells, and they've been chipped and it's a little bit powdery. She found this stacked shell and she came and she said, this is for you. And she said, see this? And she was showing me the powdery bit. She said, see this? This is your bones. Your bones are very sick and we're going to make it better. And what I had not said anything to this woman about is, as well as this lesion that they found on my brain, they had also discovered 3 lesions of bone cancer in my body that we were going to handle after the cranial surgery. So this little angel was saying to me that my bones were sick and they were going to heal me. And then she went on to say, when I go into the hospital, I need to tell the doctor, she couldn't say doctor, I need to tell the doctor to strap this shell to my hand and put my hand out like that when I go under anesthetic, because they were going to heal me. And I'm thinking, oh, here we go, so she gave me this shell. And 2 days later, when I go into the room for pre-op with the anaesthetist and the doctor, I showed them the shell. And I said, can I make a request? Would you mind strapping this to my hand while you're doing the surgery? And they picked it up, they looked at it, they said, yep, no problem. They didn't ask any questions, like why, anything at all. It was so bizarre. So they strapped it to my hand and off I went. And guess what? After the surgery and after several months, I had to go back so that we were ready now to start to deal with the bone cancer. They repeated the bone scan and there was none. The bone cancer was gone. And the doctor looked at me and said, if I reverse the order of these scans, I can explain it. He said, but I can't at all. So I'm not even going to try.
If you're getting any value out of this podcast, please hit that like button and subscribe. Also, if you've enjoyed my content before, or maybe you're new here, but you like it, drop a comment and let me know you're here. I would love to get to know my audience. Thank you for listening, and let's get back to the content. So during the surgery for your brain, did you have a near-death experience during that?
No, but I did have one. That was 2010. In 2023, I had been experiencing a chronic nervous system disorder that had me living with chronic nerve pain down the right side of my body, and it was relentless. I had extremely low blood pressure that would have me falling over and passing out without any notice. My neurologist had discovered a new way of treating this nervous system disorder with ketamine, hospital supervised ketamine. And I did some research and it was very frightening. And I said, look, I'm not sure that I want to do this. And he said, look, why don't we trial it? We'll go in with a very low dose. And if it has a positive effect, this could be a really great option for you, because we had tried everything. I tried a whole lot of trial drugs, nothing worked. And I was at my wit's end because the pain prevented me from thinking clearly and doing my work. And so I went in the first time in November 22, and it was a very successful treatment. I had 6 months pain-free. It was amazing. And then the symptoms started coming back in June 23. And so then he made the suggestion, let's go in for a second round. And without thinking, I just went, okay, well, it worked the first time, so surely it will work the second time. So I went in for a second round, but this time, this was like kind of post-COVID hospital protocols, and they weren't as vigilant with their care. And they were not supervising the effect on my liver and my bloods. And the pain management doctor decided that we would start on a slightly higher dose than what I finished off on the first time. And I questioned her and said, is that necessary? Because I was able to get the benefit with the lower dose last time. Why do I need a higher dose now? And she said, look, we want it to last longer, so it's not that much higher. We'll monitor it for you. I'd had 3 days on this higher dose, and I started getting all this pain in my liver area, and I was complaining about it. I said, hey, you need to take this out. Something's not right. And they just weren't listening to me. And because it was the weekend, they weren't ringing the doctor. Cut a long story short, my body went into toxic shock. I flatlined again. This time, it was pretty phenomenal. This time, an aspect of my awareness was able to witness something, a golden grid rising up and out of my physical form. And then at the same time, I could see this beautiful white torus field coming into the room, collecting this golden grid. I was totally unconscious. I was gone physically, but I was awake in this other area. And I was witnessing this, and I just said, wait, stop. Am I dying here? And I realized that that was what was happening. My soul grid was actually leaving my body and was going back into the light. And I said, I haven't said goodbye yet. So I didn't care that I was actually going to die. What I cared about was I didn't have the opportunity to say goodbye to my loved ones. So in an instant, an aspect of my awareness was able to be interstate, in the garden to say goodbye to my father, in the kitchen to say goodbye to my mother, in the car to say goodbye to my brother, at my sister's house to say goodbye to her, and then on the Gold Coast to say goodbye to my children. And then I was back in the room. So I was kind of here, there, and everywhere in the speed of thought. It was crazy. Actually, it was the speed of love, I was told, that you get there just at the same time. I was here, there, and everywhere, and still seeing this other thing happening in the room. And then my awareness came back into the room because I'd said goodbye to the people that I really needed to say goodbye to. And I said, okay, I'm ready now. And then all of a sudden this other voice rose up and out of my body and said, whoa, not so fast. And I was like, what's going on? Who's this? And this voice said, you have used me, you've abused me, you've ignored me, you've pushed me. And it just went on and on and on. And I could feel physical tears coming down my face because everything that this voice was saying was true. And then the voice said, it's not you that gets to decide when to tap out, it's me. And then I was totally like, and I realized that was the voice of my body. I didn't realize my body had a voice. I'd never heard, well, I had heard it before, but I'd ignored it a lot of times. But this time it got my full attention, and I felt myself metaphorically on my knees begging forgiveness, begging for one more chance, that I finally, in that moment, realized the significance of what this physical body is for, as being that house of the soul, that house of God, that finally I had a real visceral knowing and understanding that this physical body that I'd taken for granted for so many years was really, really important for being the portal for the expression of this life force energy that I'm here to be. And that without proper care, I won't get to fulfill that.
I love your interpretation of that experience. I've interviewed a lot of people who their interpretation of their experience, they often explain it as their body was something that they didn't have any sort of regard for anymore after leaving it. I heard somebody explain at one point, when you get into a shower and you take your clothes off, their body was like the clothes that they left on the floor outside of the shower. It was not something they thought about while they were in the shower. And when they got out, they just mindlessly throw it in the dirty clothes. But I absolutely love the way that you have interpreted your experience and your relationship with your body, with the vessel that does give us the ability to have this human experience. That's an amazing thing.
While we're here, if we are to achieve our soul's purpose, it requires our capacity to express our life force energy in some way. How do we do that without this physical form in this lifetime? Even if we're impaired in some way, we still have ways of communicating. And that resonance, that vibration that we are, is actually permeated through this physical form. into your energy field. So sometimes I don't need to say anything. I just need to be in your presence for our energy fields to then have the experience that we're being invited to have. But we can't do that without this physical form in this lifetime. Once we leave, we have no need for this. The soul goes on its next evolutionary journey. But for this journey, it's so important.
So after you had this exchange with the voice of your body, what happened? Did you then go back to your body?
Well, I was given another chance. Like, I opened my eyes and I was just drenched in sweat because my body was burning up, and literally left, then came back. And I had 5 people in the room around me that had witnessed this. 2 of them were psychics and they could see what was going on. And they were holding space for me to actually take the journey. I looked at them all and all I said was, I need a shower. So I just I crawled into the shower and just sat on the floor and just had cold water just wash over me. I just needed the water on my body. And then I came out and I have a new relationship with this body ever since. I consult the body every day. What do you need? Is this a good option?
Mm-hmm.
So it's much more of a respectful relationship.
I imagine it would be. I also think it's interesting that your first impulse upon arriving back in your body was water.
Yeah.
I need water, especially with what we were talking about before we started this interview about water having intelligence.
God is in the water. We are 70% water.
I love that. What do you do for a living?
Well, I don't even know how to answer that question much anymore, because once upon a time I could give you a role that I would play, like an executive coach or a quantum energy healer, or, whereas now it's like I serve the light. Wherever I'm called, I go. So it's very difficult to put a name on it. So I get asked to do interviews. I get asked to do presentations all around the world. I get asked to go and sit in community. I've been asked to return to a cave in Delphi with a circle of 8 people in September. And I've been called to go to Crete and sit on a mountain with bees for a week. So I'm going to go and do that. So I don't ask any questions anymore. I kind of smile and go, yeah, are you serious? Yeah, okay, I'll do that. I just go wherever I'm called. But I do lots of different things and I call on them as and when I'm required. So I do coaching, I do quantum healing, I do quantum journeys for people, I do shamanic energy practices, I do sound healing, I do all sorts of things.
Mm-hmm.
And I bridge spirituality with neuroscience. So I can talk to the scientific side and I can talk to the spiritual side and just bring people on that journey depending where they are.
That's what I was curious about, because you mentioned studying neuroscience. Did you go to college for that, or did you just personally study that on your own?
Yeah, no. I did it through a formal tertiary studies and I got to executive masters in neuroscience. The field kind of emerged for me in the it was 2008, I think it was. It was the first, no, it wasn't, it was 2006, the first Neuro Leadership Summit in Asolo in Italy. And I flew over there and I was in a room full of neuroscientists and people really interested in introducing neuroscience into the context of leadership. Now, my interpretation and definition of leadership is not the role necessarily that you play in a corporation. It's you as a leader, sovereign leader of your life. So that's what my interest was in learning about neuroscience. And I decided to enroll in the training. The more I learned, the more I wanted to learn. It was like everything started to make sense. It was like, so that's why I did what I did. And that's why I got that outcome. And that's why people behave the way they behave. And so for me, it just gave me the scientific backdrop to explain a lot of what I was experiencing and witnessing in life. And so I was able to bring that into my work in a really effective way. And whenever I do a lot of my presentations, I usually spend about the first 20 minutes drawing a diagram of what I call Neuroscience 101, because when people understand the impact of the way they focus their attention on the life they get to lead, then everything can change. It's like what I explained before about focusing on what you don't want versus on what you do want. And that's kind of like the first entry point with neuroscience, to understand that how you focus your attention has a material, real impact on your reality. And guess what? You've got choice about how you direct that focus and attention. But if you're not paying attention, you can get swept away by that default system that has you only look at and look out for threats. That's why I say I do a lot of work with people with OCD and really ingrained patterns of thoughts and behaviors. One of my co-authors of a book called The Wise Advocate, we wrote about this aspect of awareness called the Wise Advocate that you can tap and tune into every single day. And it's like that inner loving guide that always knows the right thing to do for you in the long run. And if you can train your awareness to tap into that inner voice, then you've got someone on your side. You don't feel so alone on your journey. And it's kind of like the bridge between like really tapping into source, because that is part of source energy anyway.
Absolutely. When you go and do presentations, do you typically do presentations on a certain type of topic, or what kind of presentations do you do?
They've kind of starting to change. Like before, it was more about leadership, change, mindset, resilience. They're the main sweet spots. And then obviously I've got the overcoming adversity and having conversations around cancer and other serious diseases and things like that. Whereas now, like the last presentation I did was for the Chamber of Commerce. They flew me interstate into a room of 300 people, and I talked about hope and giving people tangible strategies for building this reserve and resource of hope in their lives. So I showed them the science of it, and then we did some practice stuff in the room, and it was just wonderful. And I find that the right people find me. So I don't really go out there seeking opportunities much anymore. I'm in the process of writing quite a lot of books. I've got one book with a publisher, and that will be released probably next month. And then I've got another book that's being edited at the moment. And then I've got about 6 or 7 books on the go as well. So I'm just loving getting into this creative flow, finally having the time to do it. You know, the bubble is a really beautiful resource, is that it's not something designed to keep people out. It's about keeping your energy and your vibration and frequency totally in your own control, right? So people are going to behave and perform as they will, and you have full sovereignty about how you choose to show up and behave in your bubble. So when people say things like, oh, they made me do it, or, you know, they, and they start doing this, I say, look, when you point your finger, there's 3 fingers pointing back at you. So you have to stop and ask yourself, how am I contributing to this disturbance or this challenge that I'm experiencing right now? And so when you decide that I'm going to be in charge of me, I'm the boss of me, and you actually mean that, and you just in your mind's eye imagine like a balloon, a bubble all around you, and you say to yourself, right, this is mine. No one gets to come into my bubble without my consent. So if anything that you do or you say affects me, it's because I've let you come into my bubble. No one can physically jump into your brain and make you think or react in a particular way without your consent. So when you start to understand that, you go, oh, okay, I love it when kids say, you're not the boss of me. And actually, you know what? That's actually true. And I say, like my son, he's hilarious. He's 25 now. And like, I'm a meditator. I'm a crystal person. I burn incense and I do crazy stuff. And my kids are nothing like that. And they're quite amused by me because we're quite different and it's beautiful. And I remember I would go off to meditation every Friday night and I would look at my son Harrison and go, hey, Harrison, do you want to come to meditation with me? And he'd look at me and he'd go, Mum, you do you and I'll do me. And I just loved that because it was such a respectful way of going, you know what? You're weird. You want to do that? Go and knock yourself out. I don't need it. And I've encouraged my kids to be like that, to be themselves, It's not about the life I want them to lead. They need to lead their own life, to know that I'm absolutely here for them when and if they ever need me. But I need to also allow them their own sovereignty, just like I wish to have my own. So, the bubble is a really amazing resource to know that you can put what you really want in your bubble. And I don't think anyone would really want to have yucky stuff in their bubble. So if you've got yucky stuff in your bubble, you've got to ask yourself, do I really want that? Because I actually don't need to have that in my bubble. That's a form of self-sabotage and it's a form of hurting and harming myself. Why would I want to do that? You start asking different questions and you literally go, yep, don't do that anymore. Yep, don't do that anymore. Yep, not doing that anymore. So if that's what I don't want, what is it that I do want? Right? You actually physically have to ask yourself, what is it that I do want? And when you ask yourself that question, you actually have to think about it. It actually requires work. You actually have to become an active part of your reality. Because in order for you to create what you want, you have to know what you want. The reason you're not getting what you want usually is because you're not clear about it. Or you're still holding on to things that are keeping you stuck and not allowing for you to actually have what you want. So I say to people, okay, they come to me for coaching, for example, and one of the questions I'll ask them, so what do you want? Actually, I don't want this, I don't want this, I don't want this. And I'm like, great, it's awesome that you know what you don't want. If that's what you don't want, what is it that you do want? And all of a sudden they get quiet. And the focus, if you notice when you ask yourself that question, the focus comes into the front part of your brain. And the front part of your brain is what's called the prefrontal cortex. And that's the part of the brain that looks at decision-making, problem-solving, learning new things, recalling information, and putting the brakes on information. So you don't have to react because someone triggers you. So if you're in the front part of your brain, you're being mindful, you can notice that someone's triggering you and you can decide to not react. But if you're in the back part of your brain, which is fearful and looking out for potential threats, you're going to be caught off guard. So when you get triggered, you're more likely to react and not be mindful about how you respond. So this is why when you focus on what you don't want, you're in the limbic system of your brain, the back seat, and you're not really going to be in charge of how you respond in a mindful way. The only way to do that is to acknowledge, okay, I'm feeling really triggered right now. This is not feeling comfortable. What do I want? I want to feel safe. Okay, what do I need? What one thing can I do right now to feel safe? All right, get out of this place. Or say stop. Or put a boundary up. Or assert yourself more confidently. Usually what I found in my own experience is that people would only take advantage of me because I had poor boundaries. And they were boundaries that I was aware of, but I wasn't communicating. And so slowly, they would erode over time. And then I would feel resentful and I'd be like, initially I would be going, they. Then I had to stop and go, well, hang on a minute. How am I contributing to this? Well, actually, I'm not asserting my boundary. I'm not speaking up for myself. I'm ignoring my body's contractions that are alerting me that something's not right here. So now all I need to do is say, you know what, Nella? right now something doesn't feel right for me. I don't actually know what that is, but I feel like I just need to take some time out and I'll come back to you a bit later. That's all I need to do. I don't need to start an argument. I don't need to have the answer right now. All I need to do is give myself the respect and the regard that I need to get myself into a peaceful place where I can start to think clearly, to ground myself and to know what I need and what I want. And then I'll come back and go, you know what? I've had a really good think about it. And that opportunity that you're presenting for me doesn't actually feel right. I don't fully understand it, but I just need to let you know that I'm not really interested, but thanks anyway. Big deal. Mm-hmm. I'm allowed to be the boss of me. I'm allowed to say no. And I can do it with love and respect. I don't need to get defensive about it.
Absolutely. It's really easy to visualize a bubble, but having empathy as a human being, it's really difficult to determine what is an internal energy and what's an external energy. Being able to assess and discern what the source is can be a really helpful tool with that as well.
So the best way to do that is to ask yourself, does this belong to me? Is this my responsibility? And then you'll say, well, no, it's about my brother and I love him very much and I care about him. But the voice will say, yes, but it's not yours to carry. So how can you offer loving support if indeed it's wanted? Not if it's needed, it's clearly needed. But if they don't want it, you can't force it on them. So all you can do is energetically hold space and project your love and care towards that person. Pray, because guess what? Prayers actually work. It's a wish that you send out through the ethers and it goes to where you're directing it. Mm-hmm. They might not explicitly say anything or appreciate it, but you know, you get to keep your heart open and you get to still channel that loving care and concern. But this is the difference between being committed versus being responsible. I can be committed to your care and concern for you, but I don't need to take responsibility for it because it's not mine. But how dare I interfere with your sovereignty? So what the bubble does is it allows you to keep your heart open. It allows you to still be compassionate and allows you to be caring, but to know that there's a line there. But it's what's going on the other side. It's not your responsibility. But what goes on your side is 100% your responsibility.
Considering this life that you have lived and the spiritual experiences that have opened your perception and this journey you've been on, if there was one nugget that you'd want a listener to take away from hearing you talk about your experiences, what would that be?
The thing that just came to me is to realize that whatever's happened in your past doesn't define you. It creates you. It helps you remember a lot of things that maybe if those things hadn't happened, you wouldn't have remembered or reconnected with. So some of those things might not have been pleasant. Some of those things may not have been consciously chosen, but they have happened to correct your path, to pivot you in some way, and to help you strengthen, to find your voice, to assert yourself more confidently, to know what it is you want and what you don't want, and more importantly, to help other people. Because whatever path you've walked, there are other people right there where you've been that you could resource and support and help and enable in some way. And that's what we're here to do, to walk each other home.
Absolutely. And that's an amazing place to end. So thank you so much for taking time out of your day and having this conversation with me.
You're very welcome.
Thank you so much for listening to my podcast. If you loved this episode, please consider leaving a review. If you're listening on YouTube, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe so we don't lose each other. And to share the link with somebody who can appreciate this message. Blessings to you all, and I hope to catch you on my next episode.